Hawthorne had always been the kind of child who saw magic in the mundane. Cloud shapes were kingdoms, puddles were portals, and old books held spells if you read them backward under the moonlight. But it wasn't until the rainiest Tuesday in March that she discovered something truly extraordinary. Her grandmother's old cottage, nestled in the sleepy hills of Alderberry Hollow, had been passed down through generations, each woman more eccentric than the last, and now it was Grandma Elspeth's turn to fill the shelves with strange clocks, dried herbs, and teacups that rattled without wind. Tilley, sent to spend a week with Elspeth while her parents went on a work trip, had only been mildly interested in the creaky old house until she heard the whispers, soft, high-pitched whispers, coming from the cupboard beside the fireplace. At first, she thought it was the wind, or perhaps mice, but when she tiptoed closer and gently opened the carved wooden door, she found a single teacup sitting on a velvet doily, glowing faintly in the shadowy interior. It was delicate, porcelain with painted blue daisies and a tiny chip on the rim, and it hummed, yes, hummed, with something alive and curious and old. "Don't be shy," a voice piped, startling her so completely that she nearly knocked the cup over, and she stared in wide-eyed amazement as a shimmer of light rose from the cup's center and coalesced into the tiniest, most elegant person she had ever seen, no taller than her thumb, dressed in petal silk with a crown made of dew. "I'm Maribel, teacup guardian of Daisy Drop Hollow," the tiny woman announced with a bow that sent glittering dust floating around Tilley's nose. "And you, it seems, are our first human visitor in nearly a century." Tilley blinked. "I think I'm dreaming," she whispered, but Maribel only laughed, a sweet sound like wind chimes, and motioned for Tilley to come closer. "Not dreaming, dear. You're chosen." And with that, the teacup grew, not exploded or stretched, but unfurled like a paper flower, growing wide enough for Tilley to peer into it, and what she saw nearly knocked her socks off. An entire town, no taller than her hand, nestled in the curvature of porcelain hills, with glowing flowers, tiny houses built from sugar cubes and matchsticks, and dozens of people no bigger than crayons walking about and looking up in surprise at the newcomer. "You can come in," Maribel said softly, "but only if your heart's full of wonder and you promise never to break the cup." Tilley didn't hesitate. She reached out, felt a tug, a swirl, a pull like being hugged by wind, and suddenly she was shrinking, her boots pulling up like socks, her hair flowing like ribbons as she tumbled gently into the world inside the cup. She landed on a bed of spongy moss that smelled like lemon cake, and the people of Teacup Town gathered around her with awe and murmurs of, "She's real," and "A giant turned tiny," and "I hope she doesn't sneeze on the mayor." Tilley looked around in wide-eyed wonder, taking in the miniature marvels of the town. The lanterns were fireflies, the trains were beetles pulling jellybean carts, and music drifted through the air from a band of crickets playing spoons and thimbles. Maribel fluttered beside her, now a bit taller in this tiny world, and pointed to the tallest building, a castle made of lace and sugar glass. "That's the council hall," she said. "They'll want to meet you, but first, come try our honey bread and meet the storyteller snail." Tilley laughed, her heart bursting with excitement, and followed her new guide into the unfolding wonder of Teacup Town, not knowing that her arrival had stirred ancient forces, both magical and dangerous, from the cracks in the porcelain beneath their feet. Tilley had never felt so enormous and so small all at once. As she followed Maribel through the sugar crystal streets of Teacup Town, her eyes danced from one wonder to the next. Flower pots made from hollowed thimbles, chimneys puffing cinnamon steam, dragonflies tethered like carriages, and children the size of strawberries skipping rope with strands of spider silk. The air smelled like mint leaves and toasted honey bread, and every breeze carried laughter or song or the ringing of silver bells that hung from the tips of the tallest teacup daisies. "We weren't expecting visitors," Maribel explained as they passed a row of curious townsfolk, most of whom bowed or waved excitedly at Tilley, some even offering her tiny candies shaped like moons or suns. "Especially not a human. The last one was your great-great-grandmother, actually, Elspeth's grandmother, back when the cup still sat in the royal tea cabinet of the High Wisteria Court." Tilley's jaw dropped. "You mean my family has been here before?" she gasped, and Maribel giggled as they turned a corner and entered the square where the council hall rose in shimmering grandeur. "Of course. But the magic skips generations, only awakening in those who truly believe in small wonders. Before Tilley could ask more, a trumpet blasted, a sharp squeaky sort of sound, and a procession of elders descended the staircase of the council hall, each wearing a robe of stitched autumn leaves and a hat shaped like a folded napkin. The tallest among them, still no larger than Tilley's thumb, carried a staff topped with a glowing sugar cube and announced, "The Council of Crumbs welcomes you, child of wonder." Everyone bowed, including Maribel, and Tilley, feeling suddenly nervous, did the same, nearly knocking over a street lamp shaped like a lollipop. The eldest council member, whose beard curled like a snail shell and whose voice was gravel wrapped in honey, introduced himself as Elder Muddlewicks. "We are delighted and alarmed by your presence, young Tilley," he said, his eyes twinkling like mica. "For it is written that when a human returns to Teacup Town, the crack shall begin to widen, and from it shall come the sorrows." Tilley blinked. "The sorrows?" she echoed, and a hush fell so suddenly that even the fireflies dimmed. "Dark things," Maribel whispered, her wings trembling. "Shadows that once tried to drink the joy from this place. Long ago, they crept through a crack in the porcelain, caused by the cup's first great fall, and they fed on forgotten stories and broken dreams." Elder Muddlewicks nodded gravely. "They were sealed away by a brave girl, your ancestor, and the crack was patched with hope and honey, but lately, the hum beneath the town has returned. The porcelain is quivering. The crack is awakening." Tilley's heart thumped like a marching band. "What do I do?" she asked, standing tall despite her tiny frame. "How can I help?" The elders exchanged glances. "First, you must find the patchwork key," Muddlewicks said. "It unlocks the memory vault, where the first human story was stored. Only with her tale can we learn how to fight the sorrows again." Maribel took her hand. "The key was lost in the soggy forest," she said, her voice hesitant. "A strange place, always raining, and guarded by the drizzle witch." Tilley straightened her shoulders. "Then that's where I'll go," she declared, surprising even herself. A cheer erupted across the square, bells rang, spoons clattered, and the cricket band struck up a triumphant tune. "We will prepare you," Maribel said, already buzzing with excitement. "You'll need supplies, a crumb cloak, an acorn lantern, and gumdrop boots." Tilley grinned despite the fear tightening in her belly. "Let's get started," she said, and as the council hall doors opened to reveal maps, potions, and a jittery mole librarian holding a scroll longer than a curtain, she knew her adventure had only just begun. Yet far beneath the town, in the cold dark beneath the porcelain layers of the teacup, something else was beginning too. A hairline fracture glimmered like lightning across a painted daisy, and from it came a sound no one had heard in generations. A soft, sighing growl, like a dream being forgotten. The sorrows had begun to stir. Tilley woke the next morning in a cozy nook above the Teacup Bakery, wrapped in a petal-stitched quilt and dreaming of laughter made of starlight and clouds that could sing, only to be awakened by the rhythmic tapping of raindrops on her windowsill, but not the kind she was used to. These were speckled raindrops, some striped like candy canes, others glowing faintly with colors that didn't exist in the ordinary world. And as she sat up and peeked outside, she saw Maribel fluttering in place, holding a satchel stuffed with supplies and a scroll nearly twice her height. "Rise and shine, adventurer," Maribel called with a grin. "The soggy forest won't unsog itself." Tilley dressed quickly, well, as quickly as one can when putting on gumdrop boots that squish with every step and a cloak that tries to hum lullabies while you button it, and joined her guide on the rain-glazed path leading to the edge of town where the porcelain curved upward like a horizon turned inside out. The townsfolk had gathered to see her off, waving handkerchiefs made of mint leaves and tossing flower petals that stuck to her cheeks in the damp wind, and Elder Muddlewicks handed her a compass shaped like a ladybug before whispering, "Remember, the forest remembers. It remembers everything." That sent a shiver down her back. As they left the warmth and sweetness of Teacup Town behind, the air changed, the light dimmed to a silvery mist, and the path softened beneath her boots into a spongy moss that giggled when stepped on, though it didn't sound happy. Trees loomed above, their leaves wide and waxy, dripping with ceaseless drizzle that tinkled like tiny wind chimes, and puddles whispered to one another in a language Tilley couldn't understand but felt in her bones. "Stay close," Maribel murmured, her wings drooping with damp. "The soggy forest is alive in more ways than one. It watches, it tests, and sometimes, it forgets to be kind." Tilley nodded, clutching the acorn lantern tight as its warm glow pushed the mist back just a little, and they pressed on through curving paths that circled trees with faces, past vines that snored and logs that oozed poetry from their cracks. At one point, a leaf with eyes tried to sell them riddles, and Maribel had to trade one of her memories to pass by, a memory of her first snow, which left her looking distant and a little sad. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was tricky here, and just when Tilley thought she might slip into sleepwalking, they reached the hollow stump bridge, a wide arc of bark stretching across a chasm filled with sleeping frogs the size of pin cushions. "She lives just beyond," Maribel whispered. "The Drizzle Witch." And oh, how the air shivered at that name. The sky darkened, thunder rumbled like a stomach growling, and the trees leaned back as if trying not to get involved. They crossed carefully, the bridge groaning beneath their weight, and stepped onto a clearing where the drizzle fell in perfect spirals and the ground was carpeted in violet mushrooms. At the center stood a crooked hut made of wet feathers, tea bags, and snail shells, and from the chimney poured a fog that smelled like sour lemon and forgotten birthdays. Before they could knock, the door burst open with a splash, and out stepped the Drizzle Witch herself, tall for a teacup being, her robes dripping eternally, her hair a waterfall tied with bits of bone, and her eyes like rain clouds about to storm. "Who trespasses in my wet?" she thundered, her voice a downpour of accusation, and Tilley almost ran right back across the bridge, but Maribel stepped forward, chin high. "We seek the patchwork key, O soggy one," she said bravely, though her knees were shaking. "The sorrows are stirring, and the cup must be saved." The Drizzle Witch tilted her head, water sloshing from her ear. "A human child?" she said, squinting at Tilley. "Haven't seen one of your kind since I danced with sorrow myself." Her gaze softened, just a little, and she turned, waving them inside. "Come in. Dry up. Or don't. Nothing dries here." The hut was dripping from every corner, but inside was oddly warm, filled with ticking clocks, floating puddles, and jars labeled rain from forgotten days, and whispers of worms. The Drizzle Witch poured tea from a teapot that cried softly and listened as Tilley explained everything. Teacup Town, the prophecy, the crack, the key. When she was done, the witch stirred her tea with a twig and said, "The patchwork key was made from broken pieces of many things. Hope, fear, laughter, regret. It is clever. It hides. But it's drawn to stories, especially the ones untold." She reached into her robes and drew out a damp, pulsing book. "You must give it a new story to unlock its heart, a story only you can tell." Tilley blinked. "Like, make one up?" The witch smiled, and it was sad and wide like rain on glass. "No, child. Speak your truth." And so, with a shaky voice and tears she hadn't expected, Tilley told the story of being small in a big world, of parents always busy, of feeling invisible, of how the old teacup in her grandmother's cupboard made her feel seen. And as she spoke, the book quivered and opened, revealing the patchwork key, stitched from golden thread, pieces of string, and one single tear. The Drizzle Witch nodded. "You are worthy," she said, her voice softer than the mist. "Go now. But beware. The sorrows smell truth, and they are hungry." As they stepped back into the forest, the trees seemed to part with reverence, and the puddles whispered a new name for Tilley, Heartlight. But far behind them, in the place where the drizzle met shadow, something darker now stirred. A ripple passed through the porcelain beneath Teacup Town, and a shadow, no taller than a doll but darker than midnight, opened a single, gleaming eye. The return to Teacup Town was nothing like the gentle, petal-lined farewell they'd received. No songs, no sweets, no sparkled cheers, only anxious faces peering from shuttered windows and whispers thick as syrup trailing behind Tilley and Maribel as they hurried through the drizzle-drenched streets. Something had changed. The skies above the porcelain curve were darker now, heavy with a colorless shimmer like spilled ink, and a strange tension hummed in the air, as if the very cup itself was holding its breath. Tilley clutched the patchwork key tight in her hand, its golden threads warm and pulsing like a heartbeat, and she could feel its tug, gentle but urgent, pulling her toward the oldest part of town where buildings sagged with memory and ivy crept like fingers across fading murals of ancient heroes. "The vault is just ahead," Maribel whispered, her wings drooping with fatigue and worry. "No one's been inside since the age of stillness. It's only meant to be opened in times of great peril." Tilley swallowed hard as they approached a circular plaza paved with stained porcelain tiles, each painted with a different symbol. A smile, a teardrop, a quill, a flame, a lock. And at its center stood a fountain shaped like a rose in mid-bloom, though no water flowed from it now. "The keyhole is beneath the petals," Maribel explained, guiding Tilley's hand toward the hollow in the heart of the rose. Tilley took a breath, her fingers trembling, and slipped the patchwork key inside. The petals shivered. Then slowly, they curled open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into lightless depths. A rush of warm, dust-sweet air whooshed out like a sigh, and the whole plaza trembled as if the teacup itself had exhaled. Without a word, the girls began their descent, their footsteps muffled by a velvet silence that grew deeper with each spiral, until at last they reached a massive chamber where the walls glittered with painted memories, moving, living, breathing like old dreams given shape. "This is it," Maribel breathed. "The memory vault." Every surface was alive with shifting scenes, children riding soap bubble carriages, elders weaving stories into spiderwebs, Tilley's own grandmother as a young girl dancing with a dragonfly prince beneath a candy apple tree. And in the very center of the room stood a dais, upon which sat a book as thick as a pumpkin and bound in patchwork leather, its clasp marked with the very same chipped daisy pattern as the teacup that had brought Tilley here. "This is her story," Tilley whispered in awe. "The girl who sealed the sorrows." As she reached out and opened the book, her vision was suddenly swallowed by color and sound, memories crashing over her like a waterfall. She was no longer in the vault but standing inside the memory itself, watching it unfold around her like theater on all sides. There was a girl, Eloan, her great-great-grandmother, brave-eyed, wild-haired, a touch of chaos in her grin, as she stood on the edge of a cracked porcelain cliff, facing down a horde of sorrows. They were terrible things, shadowy, shape-shifting creatures that whispered things that made the flowers wilt and the sugar-glass windows shatter. Tilley watched as Eloan raised her arms, not in battle, but in story. She sang, she spun, she told the tales of every teacup citizen she had met, wrapping their names in light and laughter and courage, and as the sorrows lunged, they were caught in the stories, frozen, bound by the truth of being remembered. "Stories are stronger than shadows," Eloan cried, and with one final burst of magic, she used her own memory, her deepest, oldest, most secret dream, to seal the crack shut forever. And just like that, the vision vanished, and Tilley found herself on her knees, panting, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She gave up her dream to protect this place," she whispered. "She gave it willingly, and that's what sealed the sorrows away." Maribel nodded solemnly. "The dream of sailing the clouds," she said, brushing a hand across the book. "She never took it for herself, but she gave it to all of us, so we could dream freely." Tilley stood slowly, heart pounding. "Then if the crack is opening again," she said, "it's because someone, or something, is trying to steal the stories again." A thunderclap echoed through the vault, and the lights flickered. Maribel gasped. "They've found the fissure. The sorrows are rising." Panic surged as the murals around them began to fade, memories erased like chalk in rain. Tilley slammed the book shut and shoved it into her satchel. "Then we need to go. The town must remember who it is. We have to remind them of their own stories." And as they raced back up the spiral stairs, the walls whispering farewells behind them, the vault slowly sealed itself once more, the petals folding tight with a quiet sob, but not before a faint shadow, no bigger than a pebble, slithered out between the cracks and slipped into the world above. Teacup Town was no longer just under threat. It was already infected. The sorrows had found their way in, and they were hungry for silence. The moment Tilley and Maribel emerged from the memory vault, the world above had shifted, just subtly enough to be unsettling, like waking in a room where the furniture had all moved a few inches to the left. The porcelain sky had dimmed into a ghostly twilight, as if the teacup itself were unsure of the hour, and the usually vibrant hum of Teacup Town had quieted into a low, nervous murmur. Shops stood closed, lanterns flickered uncertainly, and even the peppermint pigeons, normally so nosy and bold, perched silently atop bent chimneys, their candy cane feathers dulled by a creeping grayness that clung to the air. Tilley felt the patchwork key pulse in her pocket like a heartbeat out of rhythm, and she could feel it, like a cold breath on the back of her neck. The sorrows were no longer hiding. They were here, and they were feeding. "Look," Maribel whispered, pointing toward the town square, where a group of villagers stood unmoving, eyes vacant, mouths slightly open, as if paused mid-thought. Tilley recognized some of them: Mr. Potts, the tinker with the bell-shaped hat; Juniper, the girl who made umbrellas out of mushroom caps; and even Elder Muddlewicks himself, his beard dragging like a forgotten bookmark across the ground. "They've lost their stories," Maribel said in a trembling voice. "The sorrows are taking them." Panic rose in Tilley's chest. "But why?" she asked, heart racing. "Why steal memories? What do they want?" "To unmake," Maribel said simply, her wings barely fluttering. The sorrows were born from discarded dreams, forgotten laughter, stories left unfinished. They believe that silence is peace, that if nothing is remembered, nothing can hurt. Tilley's eyes widened. "But that's not peace. That's emptiness." And just then, a cold voice echoed across the square, thin and brittle, like ice cracking underfoot. "Exactly," it said, "and emptiness is safe." A shadow emerged from behind the fountain, the very place they had opened the vault, and it was no larger than a kitten, but it moved with a grace that chilled the blood. Its form shifted constantly, like a living smudge of ink, and eyes, hundreds of them, blinked open and closed along its edges. "You must be the story girl," the shadow said, slithering closer. "The one with the key. The one who still dreams." Tilley stood her ground, though every instinct in her begged her to run. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What do you want from this town?" The shadow tilted what might have been its head. "I am the first sorrow," it whispered, and every blade of sugargrass nearby bent toward it. "Born the moment the first story was lost. I only wish to bring peace, to erase the ache of memory, to remove the burden of dreams." "That's not peace," Tilley shouted, her voice cracking. "That's surrender." The first sorrow didn't flinch. "It is a relief." Maribel pulled Tilley back. "Don't let it touch you. If it reaches you, it'll find your deepest story and drain it dry." Tilley felt the weight of the Memory Vault's book in her satchel. "We still have the past," she whispered. "We can fight this." But already, the town was unraveling, literally. The cobblestones beneath their feet began to come undone like stitches, curling into themselves and vanishing, leaving empty white voids where memories had once lived. Shops vanished mid-wall, and the peppermint pigeons dissolved into flakes of gray snow. "We need to remind them," Tilley said suddenly, eyes blazing. "We need to give their stories back before they're lost completely." She reached into the satchel and pulled out the great book, its patchwork cover now glowing softly. "Can it do that?" she asked Maribel. The fairy's eyes widened. "Only if read by one who believes." Without another second's hesitation, Tilley climbed onto the edge of the fountain and flung open the book. Pages flipped wildly, wind curling through the square, and her voice rang out, clear and strong, as she began to read aloud. "Once upon a time in Teacup Town, there was a baker named Mr. Potts who made bread so soft it could cure sadness." As she spoke, color returned to the baker's cheeks. He blinked, staggered, then gasped. "My wife used to sing to the yeast," he cried, and just like that, his shop blinked back into place. "And Juniper," Tilley continued, "who made umbrellas for dragonflies and wept every time it rained too hard." Juniper stirred, rubbed her eyes, and clutched her mushroom umbrella to her chest, crying, "I remember. The rain sang to me." Story by story, Tilley revived the town, her voice growing louder, steadier, like a song, like a river breaking through a dam. And all around them, the sorrows shrieked and hissed, shrinking from the light of the spoken word, their forms unraveling like loose thread. But the first sorrow did not run. It grew. "You think your little tales can stop me?" it roared, its form now towering above the square. "I carry the weight of every forgotten hope, every crushed dream, every word left unspoken. And I carry the ones we still remember." Tilley shouted, and with a final burst of courage, she opened the book to its last blank page, took the patchwork key, and pressed it to the paper. Light exploded from the page in spirals of ink and starlight, and in it, she poured her own story, not the one from the past, but her own truth. A girl who felt unseen. A girl who found wonder in teacups. A girl who chose to fight for a world not her own because it mattered. As her story wrote itself in golden ink, the first sorrow let out a roar, not of rage, but of loss, and then, with a breath, it was gone, scattered like dust on a breeze. Silence followed. Then slowly, steadily, life returned. The sky brightened. The laughter returned. Maribel wept with joy. And the teacup itself, resting quietly in the cupboard of Grandma Elspeth's home miles above, gleamed softly in the morning light, whole, strong, healed. But deep in the heart of the patchwork book, one page remained blank, waiting. Because stories never truly end. They simply wait for the next dreamer. In the days that followed the fall of the first sorrow, Teacup Town bloomed brighter than ever before, as though every memory restored had returned with double the color, double the laughter, double the life. Mr. Potts' bakery windows steamed with honey bread again, and Juniper was seen cartwheeling through the square in a flurry of dragonfly umbrellas, tossing flower petals into the air while children giggled and chased them through clouds of sugar dust. Music floated freely from rooftop cricket bands, and even the peppermint pigeons flew a little clumsier than usual, as if giddy from the return of so many stories. But beneath all the celebration, a quiet knowledge stirred. Tilley's time in the cup was nearly over. "The story always sends its author home," Maribel had said gently, resting a hand on Tilley's shoulder as they walked the path beneath the lantern trees. "You've turned the last page, brave one. And the world above is missing you." Tilley tried to smile, but it was harder than she thought. She'd saved a world. She'd found magic. And in the process, she'd finally felt seen. She couldn't imagine leaving it behind. That evening, the Council of Crumbs held a farewell feast beneath the stars, a true teacup sky this time, painted with tiny glowing comets and a moon made of carved sugar pearl, and all of Teacup Town came to celebrate the girl who restored their past and rewrote their future. Elder Muddlewicks toasted with a thimble of fizzroot cider, his beard freshly combed as he proclaimed, "Let it be known, across porcelain and petals, that Tilley Hawthorne is no longer visitor, but legend." The crowd erupted in cheers, and tiny trumpets tooted as crickets tap-danced across plates. Tilley laughed, cried, and hugged everyone she could reach. Even the grumpy dandelion vendor wept openly into a cupcake. But eventually, the feast wound down, the stars dimmed, and the moment could no longer be delayed. The teacup itself, yes, the very vessel that held their world, stood waiting in the center of the plaza, now gleaming and whole, repaired by memory, sealed by story. Maribel hovered beside it, her wings shimmering like twilight. "You'll shrink again on the way out," she said softly. "It won't hurt. It's just like being remembered by something bigger than yourself." Tilley nodded, though her heart ached. "Will I remember all of this?" she whispered. Maribel gave her a sad, sparkling smile. "You'll remember what matters. The feeling, the truth. The magic may fade, but the story will stay." One by one, the townsfolk came forward to give her tiny farewell gifts. A petal pouch of dream dust, a pebble that laughed when warmed in your hand, a scroll with the words "You are never too small to be a hero." Finally, Elder Muddlewicks stepped forward and handed her a teacup of her own, painted with a single daisy and a golden crack that shimmered in the light. "So you always have a way back," he said, eyes misty. Tilley stepped into the cup. It was warm now, welcoming. She turned one last time to wave, and Maribel reached out and pressed their foreheads together. "Tell your stories, Tilley," she whispered, "even if no one listens. Especially then." With a breath like falling into a lullaby, The porcelain bloomed around her, spun gently like a carousel, and the light swallowed her whole, until Tilley awoke in her grandmother's cottage, curled in a worn armchair beside the fireplace, the rain still tapping gently at the window panes and the cupboard standing just as it always had, quiet and still. She sat up slowly, heart racing. Had it been real? Had she dreamed it all? She ran to the cupboard and opened it. There, on the velvet doily, sat the same teacup, daisy-painted, just a little chipped, and inside it, a single, glowing petal. She gasped and reached into her pocket. Yes, the pebble. It chuckled softly in her hand. It had been real. Just then, Grandma Elspeth stepped into the room, drying her hands on a tea towel. "Have a nice nap, my love?" she asked with a smile. Tilley looked at her, eyes wide with wonder. "I have so much to tell you," she whispered. Elspeth's smile widened knowingly. "Then I'll put the kettle on," she said. Every good story starts with a cup of tea. And somewhere, deep within the teacup that sat quietly in its place, the town hummed with peace. The sorrows had been silenced. The stories had been restored. And the girl who once felt small had become larger than legend. Tilley didn't remember falling asleep. One moment she had been standing beneath the story tree, clutching the vial Maribel gave her, and the next, she was waking up in her grandmother's cottage, curled under a patchwork blanket in the same armchair she always read in. The room was quiet. The fire crackled softly, and rain still whispered against the windows like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, her eyes searching for something, anything, that proved it had been real. Her hand darted to her pocket. For a brief, terrifying second, it felt empty. But then, a tiny, smooth weight pressed against her fingers. She pulled it out. The vial. The silver thread inside shimmered faintly in the firelight, just as Maribel had promised. Her heart soared. It happened. It really happened. Tilley leapt from the chair and ran to the cupboard, the same old wooden cupboard where this entire adventure had started. She flung it open. There it was, the teacup. Still simple and delicate, with its painted daisy and fine gold seam running across the side where once a chip had been. It glowed faintly now. Just faintly, like it knew. Footsteps behind her made her whirl around. Grandma Elspeth stood in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs of cocoa and smiling that soft, wise smile of hers. "You've been sleeping for hours," she said gently. "Had quite the dream, I imagine?" Tilley opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "It wasn't a dream," she said, heart thudding. "I was inside the teacup. There's a whole world in there, Grandma. I met a fairy named Maribel, and a cricket band, and there's a council of crumb-wearing elders and sorrows that eat forgotten stories and—" She stopped, breathless. Elspeth just sipped her cocoa. "You found Teacup Town," she said matter-of-factly. "It's about time." Tilley froze. "New." Elspeth chuckled, settling into the chair beside hers. "My grandmother told me stories. When I was your age, I didn't believe her. Not really. Not until I saw a daisy flicker gold. But by the time I noticed, well, I think it had chosen someone else to tell the next part of the tale." She looked at Tilley with something like pride, but also something deeper, recognition. "I knew it was waiting for someone who believed. Someone who listened." Tilley blinked, overwhelmed. "But why me?" "Because," Elspeth said softly, "you looked at something old and ordinary, and asked if it was more." For the next hour they talked, really talked, like they hadn't in ages. Tilley told everything. The soggy forest, the drizzle witch, the memory vault, how she'd faced the first sorrow and poured her truth into a story that saved a world. And Elspeth listened, her hands wrapped around her mug, her eyes shining. "Do you know what's special about stories?" she asked when Tilley had finished. "They change the shape of the person who holds them. But they also change the world that hears them." Later that night, long after cocoa mugs had been emptied and the fire had faded into glowing embers, Tilley sat by the teacup again, holding the vial of silver thread. She felt it pulsing faintly in her palm, an anchor to a world too magical to describe and too real to deny. She pressed it to her heart like Maribel had said. Nothing dramatic happened. No flash of light. No wind. But deep inside, something shifted. She felt known. The next day at school, everything looked the same. Desks, pencils, teachers, lunch trays. But Tilley wasn't the same. And even if nobody else saw it, she carried it with her. She walked taller, laughed louder, asked questions with a spark in her eyes. When her friend Jonah looked worried about their class presentation, she leaned over and whispered, "Want to hear about a cricket band that plays symphonies on spoons? Might help your nerves." And he laughed. Just enough. She started keeping a little book in her backpack. A notebook with a daisy on the cover. In it she wrote stories. Every day. One about a boy who paints dreams into the sky. One about a forgotten keyhole in a maple tree. One about a girl who saves a world inside a cup. And slowly she noticed something strange. People began to listen. One afternoon, while reading her notebook under the tree by the library, she felt something shift in her pocket. She reached in. The silver thread was warm again. She clutched it tight and closed her eyes. She could feel them. Marble, Mr. Potts, Juniper, the memory vault. They were still there, remembering her, hoping she remembered them. And she would. Every day. Forever if she had to. Because stories never really end. Not when they're held. Not when they're passed on. Not when a girl takes a sip from an old chipped teacup and learns that magic has always lived quietly in the smallest, simplest things. Months passed since Tilley's return from Teacup Town. The seasons shifted with their quiet certainty. Summer ripened into autumn, and the first frost kissed the edges of the world as the trees shed their golden leaves. But there was something new in the air this year, something subtle yet palpable, a shift that Tilley felt every morning when she stepped outside to the sound of birds stirring and the wind whispering through the branches. The world felt larger, more alive, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something more. Tilley had become the keeper of stories. Not in a grand way, not yet, but in small, quiet moments. She carried a notebook everywhere, her most treasured possession. It was her gateway back to Teacup Town, a place she held deep in her heart. In its pages, she recorded the stories she made up during school, the ones she overheard while waiting for the bus, and even the small moments of magic that seemed to peek through her ordinary life. She wrote about the old oak tree by the library that was secretly a wizard's tower, about the door at the back of the ice cream shop that led to an ocean made entirely of cream soda, and about a bird who loved to carry letters between worlds. At school, Tilley shared her stories with Jonah, who had become her best friend. They often met in the lunchroom, where Tilley would read aloud from her notebook as he ate his sandwiches with the kind of focus that suggested he was listening not just to her words, but to something deeper, something unspoken. He always laughed at the right places, his eyes bright with wonder, and sometimes, when Tilley was describing the magical creatures of Teacup Town, he would look up and smile as if he knew they were real too. But the threads of magic Tilley had woven into the fabric of her life began to tangle, and she noticed things. Little things. The way her grandmother's tea kettle sometimes whistled a tune from a song she had never taught it. The way the shadows in her bedroom danced when the moonlight poured in, even though the wind had stopped. The way, on rainy days, the scent of wet earth would sometimes smell like marzipan. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the more she paid attention, the more she realized there was something more, something that had followed her home from Teacup Town. Magic was leaking out. One afternoon, while waiting for Jonah by the swing set after school, Tilley felt the familiar hum of the silver thread in her pocket. It pulsed softly, a gentle reminder that the world of Teacup Town hadn't disappeared, it was still there, waiting. It was then that she noticed something even stranger. The tree by the playground, the one they'd always played around, looked different. The bark shimmered, just for a moment, in the way moonlight reflects on a still lake. She blinked, and the shimmer was gone, but it left her wondering, was this magic, too? Or had the lines between the worlds begun to blur? "Tilley!" Jonah called from the edge of the field, waving. "Come on, let's go to the creek. There's something weird going on with the rocks." Tilley pushed the thought to the back of her mind and ran toward him, wondering, not for the first time, whether Teacup Town was still trying to find her again. Did magic ever really leave? Or did it simply wait until it was needed most? As they wandered down the hill toward the creek, Tilley's thoughts drifted to the teacup. Would she ever go back? Would she have the chance to visit Maribel, to walk the cobblestone streets again, to sit by the memory vault and listen to the voices of the past? Her heart tugged at the thought of saying goodbye again. But as she watched Jonah lead her to the creek, she felt a strange sense of reassurance. They reached the rocks and Tilley gasped. The water, usually clear and calm, was glowing faintly, a soft, silver-blue glow that rippled with the current. The rocks at the bottom of the creek shimmered like treasure, as though the water itself had become enchanted. "Do you see that?" Jonah whispered, crouching down. "It's like the creek's alive." Tilley nodded slowly, her hand resting over the silver thread in her pocket. The hum was stronger now, vibrating against her chest. She could feel the pull of something deep beneath the water, as though it was calling to her. Without thinking, she reached into the stream, her fingers brushing the glowing rocks. At once, a sudden warmth rushed through her, as if the creek were welcoming her, recognizing her as something more than just a girl. A story keeper, a bridge between worlds. A shape rose from the water, something small and flickering like a flame. It darted toward Tilley with surprising speed, and she stumbled back, startled. But instead of vanishing, it landed in her palm. A tiny creature, no larger than her hand, glowing like a firefly, with wings that shimmered like the surface of the water. It was a fairy or something very close. "I'm not lost," the tiny creature said in a voice like wind through reeds. "You found me." Tilley's heart skipped a beat. The creature fluttered its wings, hovering in her hand, sending a warm, tingling sensation up her arm. "What are you?" Tilley asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm part of your story," the creature said. "We are threads woven into the same fabric. Every time you write, every time you remember, you call us back. We are magic made real, and we live in the space between worlds." Tilley gasped. "The space between worlds? You mean Teacup Town?" The fairy nodded. "The worlds are always connected, even when they seem far apart. And you, Tilley Hawthorne, have learned to walk that line. The teacup's magic doesn't fade. It grows. And it waits." Jonah looked at Tilley, confusion written on his face. "What is this?" he asked. Tilley turned to him, her eyes wide with wonder. I think Teacup Town might still be waiting for me. Or maybe it's waiting for us." The fairy blinked at her with a knowing look. "It's always waiting for the next dreamer. And now that you've started, you'll never stop." With that, the little creature fluttered its wings once more and rose into the air, vanishing like a star lost in daylight. The glow in the creek began to fade, but the feeling of magic, the undeniable pulse of it, lingered. Tilley felt it deep in her bones, as though something had shifted again. Something that connected her not just to Teacup Town, but to everything, the ordinary world, the magical one, and all the spaces in between. I think I'm ready," Tilley whispered to herself. Her fingers closed around the vial of silver thread in her pocket. "I think I'm ready to share the stories. All of them." Jonah gave her a puzzled look, but there was a spark in his eyes, too, one that told her he wasn't quite sure what was happening, but he was ready to follow her anywhere. Tilley looked out over the creek one last time. The world felt both familiar and infinitely bigger now. She was no longer just a girl with a teacup and a notebook. She was part of a story that stretched across time, across worlds, across possibilities. And there, in the space between those worlds, Tilley knew that magic would always find her. Tilley awoke early the next morning, the first light of dawn slipping through her curtains like a secret. Her mind was a whirl of ideas, dreams, and memories from the previous evening. She reached for her notebook, the one she'd written in ever since her return from Teacup Town, but as her fingers brushed the pages, she paused. Something had shifted. The ink she'd written just days ago suddenly felt different. The words seemed to hum with an energy that had never been there before. She flipped through the pages, noticing that all the stories she'd written felt alive. The characters seemed to breathe from the paper, and the words themselves shimmered like sunlight on water. It wasn't just the magic of Teacup Town coming through. It was something else. Tilley's fingers traced the edges of a story she'd started just the night before, a tale about a young woman named Leora who could hear the songs of the stars. As she ran her fingers across the words, she noticed something that made her heart skip. The words shifted, subtly, as though they were reacting to her touch. One sentence rearranged itself, forming a new line. She read it aloud. Leora, who had once stood beneath the stars, now began to listen to the world beyond the sky. A shiver ran down Tilley's spine. She hadn't written that. And yet, there it was, written in her notebook as though it had always been there, waiting for her to discover it. The familiar hum of the silver thread pressed against her chest, and she instinctively touched the vial in her pocket. The little fairy's words echoed in her mind. You are a thread woven into the fabric of this story. The realization hit Tilley all at once. She wasn't just writing these stories, she was becoming them. Each time she picked up her pen, she was weaving new threads into the fabric of a world that existed just beyond the veil. And somehow, she had the power to make those threads real. But that wasn't all. The teacup, the vial of silver thread, the humming in her chest, it all meant that she wasn't alone in this. The magic that had once been a tiny flicker in the teacup was now part of her, a part that could reach out and touch not just her world, but other worlds. She had the gift of the storyteller, a power to bridge the gap between ordinary and extraordinary, to pull creatures and places out of the shadows of forgotten memory and into the light of her imagination. And with that power came responsibility. She could shape destinies. She could call forth heroes, villains, and untold adventures. She could weave new beginnings for Teacup Town, for herself, and for all the worlds between. A tap on her window broke her thoughts. Tilley rushed to open it, peeking out to find Jonah standing below, waving enthusiastically. His face was flushed from running. "Tilley, you have to see this," he called. "There's something at the old oak tree." Tilley's heart leapt. The oak tree. She hadn't thought about it in days, but the memory of its shimmer from the other afternoon was still fresh in her mind. Was it possible that it was connected to everything she had written? "I'll be right there," she called back, grabbing her notebook and pen. She had a feeling that today was going to be the start of something new, something big. The walk to the oak tree felt shorter than usual, though the distance was the same. Tilley's mind buzzed with possibilities. If the oak tree had something to do with her stories, could it be the gateway? She didn't know yet, but the thought made her stomach flutter with anticipation. Jonah was already there, standing by the massive trunk, his eyes wide. "Look," he said, pointing to the base of the tree. Tilley's breath caught in her throat. At the roots, the earth had parted, and in the space where the soil had split, a small wooden door stood, half hidden by the grass. It was unlike any door Tilley had ever seen, shaped like an arched window frame, painted with faded blue flowers and gold trim. The wood was smooth and warm to the touch, and when Tilley ran her fingers over it, she felt the faintest pulse beneath her fingertips. "A door?" she whispered, her heart racing. She turned to Jonah, whose face was a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Where did it come from?" "I don't know," Jonah said, his voice almost trembling. "But I think it's for you." Tilley hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The hum in her chest grew louder, like a calling she couldn't ignore. She placed her hand on the door's handle and turned it. The door opened with a soft creak, and Tilley stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, everything changed. She was no longer standing by the oak tree. Instead, she found herself standing in a wide, sunlit meadow, surrounded by tall grass that waved in the breeze. The air smelled like wildflowers and honey, and the distant hum of a waterfall echoed through the landscape. In the distance, a castle towered high, its spires reaching for the sky. But it wasn't the castle that caught her attention, it was the people walking through the meadow. They were all familiar. Tilley's heart thudded. One of them was Maribel, the fairy who had led her through Teacup Town's trials. Maribel was standing near a stone archway, laughing as she danced with a group of children, her wings sparkling like moonlight. Tilley stepped forward, barely able to breathe, and then she saw Mr. Potts, the baker from Teacup Town, waving at her with a tray of cookies. "Welcome back, Tilley," he called, his voice bright with warmth. "We've been waiting for you." A shiver of joy ran down her spine. Teacup Town. She was here. This place was real. and it was waiting for her. "Maribel," Tilley called out, rushing forward. The fairy turned and smiled warmly as Tilley approached. "You came back," Maribel said, her voice as musical as it had been in the teacup. "You're a true storyteller now, Tilley. You've opened the door between worlds." Tilley's heart swelled. "But how? What does it mean?" "It means," Maribel said, "that the magic is no longer just inside the teacup. It's inside you now. And this world, this place, is yours to shape just as much as your stories are." Tilley glanced around, taking in the meadow, the distant castle, the warm, golden light of this new world. She realized then that Teacup Town had never truly been separate from her. It had been waiting for her to see the connections, to understand that the stories she wrote, the magic she wove, weren't confined to the pages of a book. She could live both in the ordinary world and in this one, where stories and magic were as real as the ground beneath her feet. "I'm ready," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Good," Maribel replied, her eyes twinkling. "Then let's start the next story." The door behind her clicked shut, and Tilley stood in the meadow, her heart racing as the wind lifted her hair. The vibrant colors of Teacup Town stretched before her, rich greens, sunny yellows, and the dazzling blue sky above. Everything felt so familiar, but also startlingly new. She had read about magical worlds in books, but standing in one herself? It was something else entirely. Maribel fluttered down from the stone archway where she had been waiting, her wings sparkling like moonlight on water. She landed lightly on the soft grass before Tilley, her smile warm and knowing. "You've crossed over now, Tilley. You've opened the door not just for yourself, but for everyone who believes in the stories you tell." Tilley swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "But what does that mean for me? For my world? For the stories I write?" Maribel's expression softened, and she nodded. "It means you now hold the weight of magic in your hands. The stories you write, the ones you tell, they come to life, sometimes in ways you can't foresee." She looked out at the meadow, where the soft sound of laughter carried through the breeze. "You have the ability to shape this world and the world outside it, but with that comes a responsibility. Stories are more powerful than you realize, Tilley. And not every story is meant to be told lightly." Tilley's mind swirled with questions. "But I thought stories were meant to be shared, to be told. How can they be dangerous?" Maribel's wings fluttered softly, and she glanced around at the meadow, her eyes darkening slightly. "Not all stories are pure. Some are born from fear, from anger, from longing or sorrow. And when those stories are told, they can shape worlds in dangerous ways." Tilley's stomach nodded. "Are you saying, I've been writing dangerous stories?" "No," Maribel said gently, her voice calm and reassuring. "You've been writing stories full of hope, adventure, and wonder. But stories have a life of their own. When you write, you plant seeds, and sometimes, those seeds grow in ways you can't control. And every time you tell a story, it echoes through both worlds. The ripples can be beautiful, but they can also cause harm." Tilley's chest tightened. She thought of the stories she'd written, of the boy who painted dreams into the sky, the girl who saved a forgotten world, and the fairy that lived in the teacup. She'd never intended any harm, but now she wasn't so sure. Maribel seemed to read her thoughts, and she placed a hand gently on Tilley's shoulder. "Don't worry, Tilley. This is part of the process. The more you learn, the more you'll understand how to balance the worlds you're creating. But be mindful. Always. Balance." Tilley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stories are like threads," Maribel continued, "woven into the fabric of everything. Some are gentle, like the morning breeze. Others can become storms. It's not about avoiding the storms, but knowing when to let them pass and when to guide them." Tilley took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Maribel's words settle over her. She had so many questions, so many ideas that she was bursting to write down. But now, she realized, there was more to this magic than just writing whatever came to her. Stories had power, real power. Before she could ask more, the air around them seemed to shimmer. A figure appeared in the distance, walking toward them with a steady, purposeful gait. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a crown of twigs and leaves woven into his hair. His eyes glimmered with a quiet intensity, and his presence felt ancient, as though he had witnessed countless stories unfold. He stopped just in front of Tilley and Maribel. "Ah, Tilley Hawthorne," the man said, his voice rich and deep, like the hum of the earth itself. "You've come." "Who are you?" Tilley asked, unsure of whether she should be excited or wary. "I am the keeper of stories," he replied. "I guard the boundaries between the worlds. I ensure that stories don't spill over where they shouldn't. My name is Jorlin." Tilley's eyes widened. "You mean you control the stories?" Jorlin chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Not control. I guide them. I help ensure they stay true to their origins, that they don't become corrupted. But sometimes they break free." He fixed his gaze on her. "And that's where you come in, Tilley Hawthorne. You have the power to create, but you must also learn how to contain what you create. What you write can shape this world, and it can unravel it if you're not careful." Tilley shivered, the gravity of his words sinking deep into her bones. She had known her stories had power, but this was different. She wasn't just a writer anymore. She was a guardian. "The world of Teacup Town is fragile," Jorlin continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "And if stories go unchecked, they can warp the fabric of reality itself. The people here, they live in the margins of forgotten tales. They are both part of the world and separate from it. And when stories break, when they fall apart, they can tear at the very foundation of what is real." Tilley's throat tightened. "What happens if a story breaks?" "It's not just the story that shatters," Jorlin replied. "The world around it does too. People forget. Places disappear. The bonds between worlds weaken." He looked at her steadily. "But it's not too late. You can mend what has been torn. You just need to understand the cost of the stories you tell." The weight of his words crushed down on Tilley like a storm cloud, threatening to suffocate her. The cost? She hadn't considered that before. She had only seen the beauty in the stories, the joy of creating something from nothing, the thrill of weaving a tale. But what if her stories weren't just shaping the world? They were shaping her too? What if the price for that kind of magic was more than she could bear? Jorlin's gaze softened as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do not fear, child. You have a gift, but you also have the wisdom to grow into it. We all start somewhere. Just remember, balance is key. Every story has its light and shadow. And you, Tilley, are the one who must hold the line between them." Tilley nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't just a visitor to this world. She was a part of it, a piece of its delicate fabric. The thread she carried within her chest wasn't just magic. It was a promise. A promise to protect the stories, to keep them from unraveling, to guide them toward the light. She glanced at Maribel, who was watching her with a knowing smile. "You're not alone," Maribel said softly. "The stories will teach you, and we will help you." Tilley took a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers, not yet. But she was ready to face the cost of her gift, ready to learn how to balance the worlds, to create stories that could heal and not harm, to protect the magic she had discovered and make it flourish. "I'll be careful," she whispered. "I promise." Jorlin nodded, then slowly faded into the shadows of the meadow. "We'll be watching, Tilley Hawthorne. We all will." And as the light of the evening sun bathed the meadow in a warm, golden glow, Tilley knew in her heart that she had taken the first step on a journey that would change everything. She wasn't just a storyteller. She was a guardian of the stories, and with that responsibility came both great power and great sacrifice. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her notebook in her hands and the silver thread pulsing her heart. Her journey was just beginning. Weeks passed since Tilley's first steps into the magical world of Teacup Town, and with each day, she grew more attuned to her gift. She had learned to carefully craft stories, to weave them into the world of Teacup Town, while ensuring they did not unravel the fabric of reality. Yet, even with this newfound mastery, she still felt the weight of Jorlin's words hanging over her. Her notebook, once a place of pure inspiration, had become both a treasure and a burden. Each word she wrote was infused with magic, powerful, delicate, and dangerous. She could feel the stories taking root in Teacup Town, causing ripples in the landscape, shaping the lives of the people who inhabited it. But sometimes she wondered if she was changing the world too much, if the magic she wove was becoming something uncontrollable. One afternoon, as she sat by the oak tree, her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Tilley!" She turned to see Jonah approaching, his expression grave. He'd been her closest companion through this journey, and his presence had been a constant reminder that her world, her real world, was still very much a part of her. "What is it, Jonah?" she asked, setting her notebook aside. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around nervously. "It's happening again. The stories, they're leaking." Tilley's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what he meant. The borders between Teacup Town and her own world had begun to blur. It had happened a few times already, strange occurrences, people from Teacup Town popping up in unexpected places, and moments where the boundaries between imagination and reality had grown thin. It was like the magic was spilling over, uncontrolled. "What's going on?" Tilley asked, standing up quickly. "Is it Teacup Town? Is it okay?" Jonah shook his head. "That's just it. People have been showing up here, people from Teacup Town, at random. And they're not supposed to be in our world, Tilley. They don't belong here. They're getting lost and some of them are changing. They're becoming shadows of themselves." Tilley's mind raced. She felt the silver thread in her pocket hum faintly, urging her to act. This was no longer just about writing stories. It was about protecting the balance between the two worlds. "We need to go back," Tilley said, determination creeping into her voice. "Now." Together, they hurried toward the oak tree. As they approached, the air grew thick with magic, and the familiar wooden door appeared, half hidden among the roots. Without hesitation, Tilley grasped the handle and swung the door open. They stepped through, and instantly, the warmth of Teacup Town wrapped around them. The world seemed different now, darker, more tense. The bright colors and cheerful sounds that had once filled the streets now felt muted, as if the very essence of Teacup Town had started to fray. "Tilley!" Maribel's voice rang out from the edge of the square. She fluttered toward them, her wings shimmering in the fading light. "You've come just in time." "What's happening?" Tilley asked, her voice urgent. Maribel's eyes were filled with concern. "It's the stories. They've started to unravel. Something you wrote, something you created, has gone wrong. The balance is tipping." Tilley felt a cold knot in her stomach. "What do I need to do?" Maribel hesitated, her wings fluttering anxiously. "You need to find the source, Tilley. Whatever story you wrote that's causing this imbalance, it's threatening to break both worlds apart. You're the only one who can stop it." Tilley nodded. She could feel it now, the magic, the wildness, the energy swirling in the air around her. It wasn't just the teacup that had power now. It was her. She was the key to the story's resolution. But where to begin? Her mind flashed to the many stories she had written, to the characters she had created, each one now a part of the world she stood in. There was one story, however, that lingered in her thoughts, an unfinished tale about a lonely boy who had written his own future into existence. A boy who wanted to escape the confines of his own world and rewrite reality itself. Tilley had never meant for the story to be more than just an idea. But now, she realized the boy she had created had done just what she had written. He had reached out into the real world, and through the magic she had woven, had crossed the boundary that separated Teacup Town from hers. And in doing so, he had brought a part of the story with him. "Jonah," Tilley said suddenly, her voice sharp with realization. "I know what happened." "What?" he asked, looking confused. "The boy from the story, the one who wanted to change everything, he's real now. He somehow crossed over into both worlds." Maribel's face grew pale. "That's dangerous, Tilley. If the boy continues to exist in both worlds, the barrier will collapse entirely." "Then I'll fix it," Tilley said, her resolve hardening. She stepped forward, determination shining in her eyes. "I'm going to find him and make it right." Tilley and Jonah set off, following the traces of the boy's existence. Everywhere they went, they saw signs of the story's unraveling, things that didn't belong, shadows that flickered in and out of existence, strange flashes of light that would appear and vanish within seconds. The world around them felt fragile, like a dream on the verge of fading away. Finally, they reached a small clearing at the edge of Teacup Town, where the last threads of the story seemed to have gathered. There, standing in the middle of the clearing, was the boy from her story, tall, thin, with dark eyes full of longing. He stood still, as though waiting for something, and when he saw Tilley, he blinked in confusion. "You," he said, his voice trembling. "You're the one who made me." Tilley took a cautious step forward. "You're from my story. You shouldn't be here. You're not meant to exist in this world." The boy shook his head, his expression sorrowful. "I didn't ask to be here. I just wanted to be free. But now I can't go back. I can't unwrite myself." Tilley felt a pang of empathy for him. He had been born from a story, a creation of her own imagination, but now he was lost between two worlds. She understood his desire to rewrite his future, to escape the constraints of his world. But the balance had to be restored. "You don't belong here," Tilley said softly, her voice filled with regret. "I can't let you stay in both worlds. It's tearing everything apart." The boy's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and anger. "Then what should I do? What's left for me? You made me this way. You gave me hope only to take it away." Tilley's heart ached. She had never meant for her stories to cause harm, but now, the consequences of her words were laid out before her. She had to make it right. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding out her notebook, where the last words of his story still remained unfinished. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said gently. "But the stories we create, they can't control us. We need to finish what we started. Together." The boy stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Finish the story," he whispered. Tilley opened her notebook and began to write. Hours later, the world of Teacup Town seemed to calm. The air cleared, the magic settled, and the cracks in reality began to heal. The boy, now a memory of a tale told, was no longer a part of the world. But Tilley knew that in his place, she had created something more enduring, the lesson that stories are not just for telling, but for learning from. When she closed her notebook and looked up, the sky had begun to brighten, the first rays of dawn casting a soft glow over the town. Maribel was standing nearby, smiling proudly. "You did it, Tilley. You've restored the balance." Tilley smiled, but there was a weight to her expression. She knew now that her role as a storyteller was both a gift and a responsibility. And while the threads of her imagination could bring worlds to life, they could also unravel them. "Every story," Tilley whispered to herself, "has its own thread to follow." And with that, she knew she was ready. Ready to write, ready to create, and ready to protect the balance of both worlds.